Yo, 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 what's going on, my peoples? This is Shaun from Zoobox. I don't know where that came from. That was weird. That was real strange. Anyways, today we're going to be talking about the 1929 silent film Woman in the Moon. The film is directed by Fritz Lang, written by Theo von Harbo, Fritz Lang, and one other guy who wrote a book that it's based on called Rocket to Interdimensional Space. The film stars Willy Frisch, Gerda Morris, Klaus Pohl, Fritz Rasp, Gussel Gussenbayer, and others. We'll just stop there. The plot synopsis is a tenacious scientist blasts off for the moon in hopes of riches that may be found there. So yeah, I had a weird little like a Fritz Lang film festival in my house today. Got up early with the boy. This had been sitting on my shelf for a couple weeks. I got this a couple weeks ago. I think this is actually during that Kino Lorber sale. I ended up getting it. And, I just been meaning to watch it. But it's a long movie. It's 169 minutes. This cut of the movie is 169 minutes. So I was like, when are you going to find time to watch a 169-minute silent film from 1929? Well, you get up early enough. You get enough time in the day afterwards. That's also another benefit of being sick right now. Everybody in my house being sick. Everybody's very low key. Nobody really bothers me. We just got to. I just put on movies and while they play games and stuff like that. And so I watched it for the first time. This is the first time watch for me. I've been trying to go back and kind of watch some of these fundamental movies. I want to go back to the silent era. There's a lot of kind of gaps in my film knowledge. A lot of it surrounding that era. Probably from the 1920s up to the 1940s, early 1940s. There's a lot of gaps, and there's a lot of good stuff in there. And somebody like Fritz Lang is somebody that's always worth paying attention to. I mean, I, like most people, saw Metropolis long time ago. Actually, I watched it again today. We're going to talk about that in another video. But that was the one I was most familiar with. I was familiar with that, and I was also familiar with his first spoken film, the one with sound, was M. With what's his name? Can't remember the actor's name off the top of my head. But yeah, so I was familiar with him from those things, and those are seminal, right? Those are pretty profound pieces of work. Metropolis, a classic, obviously, has an interesting road to becoming a classic, but a classic nonetheless. M is fantastic. It's one of the first kind of serial killer thrillers. It's a very dark movie. It's a very intense movie. Has a lot of social commentary. I might watch that again in the next few days, so we'll probably talk about it then. But I haven't seen a lot of his other stuff. I haven't seen the Dr. Was it Mabuse? Dr. Mabuse the Gambler, the Testament of Dr. Mabuse, and then The Thousand Eyes of Dr. Mabuse. I've never seen any of those movies, so I'm like, I'm going to get around to watching some of that stuff. I want to delve just deeper into his filmography. And this was just on sale for I think it was $9 or $10, and I was like, I'm sure it's worth having. Even if I don't end up loving it for posterity, us collectors, we love that posterity. It helps us rationalize buying a lot of things. So I ended up picking it up, watching it this morning. One sitting, too. I watched it in one sitting. Now, what did I think of Woman in the Moon? I think the technical aspects of it, the things that went into its creation, are far more impressive than maybe the movie itself. The movie itself is it's a pretty simple story. It does have some interesting layers. It's about kind of ambition and relationships and the responsibility of science, the responsibility that we have to each other as human beings and making these kinds of endeavors, and what we're willing to kind of risk and put on the line to do those things. What we're willing to put aside in the name of progress. And this movie is very specifically a woman, love. So that's kind of the embodiment of man's sacrifice, being willing to kind of go beyond himself and beyond his own primal nature to do something incredible. And there's all these different motivations that go into that. Because there's this kind of shadowy business interest that comes in and kind of swoops in and steals their research, and they have to kind of make a deal with it. So there's also this greedy economic layer. It's kind of talking about these different paradigms, these different prisms of which you could approach wanting to go to the moon. The movie starts with this crazy old man kicking one of these business guys out of his apartment, who ends up stealing his research because they want to buy his research because he thinks there's gold in the moon. There's gold up there, baby. And that kind of spurs everything on a little bit. I wouldn't say it spurs everything on, and well, not all of the characters in totality. Helios, the main, like the scientist, the rocket engineer, he is more driven by just kind of the joy of discovery, the joy of science. Like he's really into that kind of stuff, and it just kind of goes on from there. It's got kind of an adventure movie type of feel to it. The film techniques are very impressive for the time. Obviously, some of the special effects work that went into it, and should be no surprise if you've watched Fritz Lang's early stuff, or at least if you've seen Metropolis. Really, he made a movie in between this and Metropolis, but this is almost basically like a follow-up to Metropolis. And from a technical level, you can definitely see that. I don't know if it's technically as impressive as Metropolis. And Metropolis is kind of awe-inspiring. Even today, you can watch Metropolis and be like, wow, like this shit is so good. It's so creative. And Woman in the Moon, I think it had a little bit of a bigger budget. He was getting a little bit more notoriety by this time. Like I said, Metropolis was kind of a big deal. And even the German government actually really liked him. Which is one of the reasons why he ends up leaving, because Hitler took a fancy to him and he didn't want to make propaganda movies, basically. I think he ends up making one propaganda movie before he flees to America, if memory serves me correct. But yeah, so he had a bigger budget on this movie. And it kind of shows. It's a much cleaner looking movie. That might be partially due to the restoration. F.W. Murnau did a restoration of this movie in 2000. This is the version that I have, which now I believe this is kind of the staple version. Because it's weird with a lot of these old silent movies. There's just usually like 6 or 7 different versions of them. Ones that were in different countries, or ones because footage was lost and they had to cobble something together. Metropolis suffered that fate for a long, long time. Woman in the Moon, I don't think it was as troubled in that sense, but there is like 5 cuts of this movie. Ranging from 85 minutes to 3 hours and 20 minutes. And this is somewhere in the middle. It's 169 minutes. So 2 hours and 49 minutes. It's a long one. It's a sit. And I can't, and part of it is, part of what makes it impressive, or what makes it, I guess, worth your time, is the special effects. Is obviously that Fritz Lang is kind of a visual genius. His use of perspective, the way he built his sets, it still kind of maintains that German expressionistic feel that from something like Metropolis or Dr. Marabousse. It still has those elements to it, and it's this very simple, pared down, kind of beautiful version of space travel. It's really kind of neat. It's really cool because they didn't know anything about the actual practicalities of it, but they had a lot of ideas. And this goes into like the government kind of helping Fritz Lang. This was apparently a very plausible construction of a rocket. This even is the first instance of a rocket even being thought of as having like multi-parts, like it would break away as it was in trajectory towards wherever it was going in outer space. That comes from this movie. That comes from the research they did for this fucking movie. Even the countdowns, for 10, 9, 8, when a rocket's about to go off, right? That's from this movie. That's like how influential this movie was, because if a lot of people don't know, Germany, big part of the rocket program, big part of what got us outer space. Operation Paperclip. You should check it out sometimes. When we took Nazi scientists after World War II and basically stuck them in NASA. Werner von Braun, sorry, a little tongue twisted there. Werner von Braun he always would cite this movie as a huge influence, and also his mentor, which his name escapes me. The guy who is Werner von Braun's mentor was also a big part of this. And they actually banned this movie in Germany for a while during the 30s and 40s because it was so close to what they were doing with the V-2 rockets. So they didn't want any type of, tipping of the hat to anyone about what was going on, with their rocket program. So it's kind of one of these crazy things where it's all like the way that Star Trek has affected like the production of certain types of technologies in our modern era. Women in the Moon, very influential. It's one of those cool moments where like art informs life, it becomes life a little bit. And it was because of the passion of the people behind the scenes. Fritz Lang himself. Apparently he was just really into science fiction, really into science, and he wanted to do like a serious sci-fi movie. This is often thought of as like the original hard sci-fi movie. Even though it's, the story itself, the characters, the plot is kind of a silly, it's a little bit of a romance. It's got kind of a comedic aspects to it. It's got a love triangle. It's all a little bit predictable, but it's a really, really kind of saccharine in a good way. Makes you feel good at the end. It has a good, like, uplifting message. That's kind of a little bit tragic, but also really, really inspiring and just heartwarming in a way that modern movies don't often give you. What else about Fritz Lang here? It was just a cool movie. I think honestly, after watching the 2 hours and 49-minute version, I kind of wish that I had watched or next time I watch it, I would like to watch one of the shorter cuts. I would like to see the 95-minute cut. I feel like you could cut a lot of this movie out. As I was watching, I was like, oh, there's like a tight 90-minute, maybe 2-hour movie to be culled from this, because it's a lot of stuff. And that's something else I've kind of reflected on watching some of these silent films, because of the process of them kind of getting lost and rediscovered over years and time. And then the people that find them, 50, 60 years later, trying to approximate what they thought the director wanted. So there's almost like no true cuts of some of these movies. There's no true director's cut for some of this stuff. I don't know if that's the case with Woman in the Moon. I'm not sure if it is. But it's just, to me, it's always just like, sometimes I feel like they think more is better. They just think, oh, well, we've discovered this footage, so we're going to do like an assembly cut of the movie. And that's sometimes the one that is the most widely available. Like Metropolis, right? There's a 2-hour version of Metropolis that Kino put out in like 2001. And then in 2010, somebody found more footage and they just put it in there. Like, does the Metropolis need to be 3 hours long? I don't know. Other movies like that, we've talked about Vampire, Joan of Arc. There's longer versions of those, but I, thankfully saw kind of the 90-minute ones, and those are the ones that are considered the official versions, and they play like gangbusters. They play great. This almost, I would say, kind of overstays its welcome because it takes a long time to get going. And just because we're just more of a modern audience, are a little bit more savvy as to what a story like this, how it's going to play out, what it requires. So you're way ahead of the movie. You're just way ahead all the time. And that's not a fault of the movie itself. You got to put it in the context of time that it was made. But it doesn't need, I don't know if it needs to be almost 3 hours long. That would be my main criticism. It was cool to see it because of all the cool film techniques and the interesting kind of world building, the technology, seeing this kind of nascent rocket technology be explored in a movie. Pretty cool. It's definitely worth for watching for posterity, for just having a greater appreciation and understanding of the art form, especially in those early days. And I'm looking forward to like diving more into Fritz Lang. M is I'd probably put it in my top 20 movies. M is a great movie, and I can't wait to talk about that when I give it a revisit. It's been a while since I watched it. But yeah, that's going to do it for me today, everybody. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to know more about Zoobox, there's a bunch of links in the description for Facebook, for Instagram, for my personal Twitter. Also, if you'd like to make a recommendation for a daily video, throw it in the comments section and I'll put it on the list. All right, everybody. You have a good one.